Weather Bell Analytics meteorologist Joe Bastardi. This was the Japanese model forecast for upward motion for the month of August. It did a great job. This is up at 200 millibar, and you can see how all the action is in the Pacific. You see that? It's blue, and the Atlantic is yellow, and that's indicative of sinking overall going on, and the suppression in the tropics. Well, this is changing around now. And you can see that the blue is in the Atlantic. And look at this sinking forecast for the month of September over the Southwest Pacific. So the action comes into the Atlantic. Now, folks, we try to put this out from 10 days ago, 9 days ago, 10 days, last Thursday, the JMA was signaling this was going to happen. And I'm going to show you why it's happening. Well, first of all, we've got another monster typhoon that's heading for southern Japan. And the water has been cooling. See the cooling going on here? It's now cooler than normal because of one typhoon after another. Notice this configuration of very warm water, very cool water, and notice the water is warming off Africa here. Now what this does, when you have that kind of configuration in there, it leads to a lot of storminess trying to develop over the North Atlantic. And when you get storminess over the North Atlantic, you get what's referred to as a negative North Atlantic oscillation begins to develop. Now, during the wintertime, that is something that we look for a lot of snow, believe it or not. But during the summertime, what happens is, or especially in September, if you get lower than normal pressures here, they will, and you'll get higher than normal pressures just to the south of it. You'll reduce the strength of the easterlies off Africa. So let's look at how this works out. The North Atlantic oscillation is going negative. Now, let's get back to the Pacific first because you see how that water has cooled there. What I'm doing here is I am showing you the linkage between what's going on in the Pacific and what's going on in the Atlantic. By the way, all that cold water of the North Atlantic is a natural process of cyclical change that we've shown you before, that when you get these warm periods, and there's no question the globe is in a warm period, the increase of water vapor will cause it to snow more in the northern hemisphere winters, and that melts off, and that in turn runs into the ocean and starts cooling the ocean. And there's all sorts of theories as to how this works. And of course, there's one theory now that CO2 is doing it. But it's interesting how the change in the Atlantic is taking place and how drastic it's been since 2012. The change in the North Atlantic has taken place, and you have a lot more snow up at Greenland, and how it's doing it in relation to natural climate cycle theory. So you've got this going on here, and you've got the very warm water left here, and that's helping to create that negative NAO. Meanwhile, the Southwest Pacific is cooling because of all the typhoons going through there. Look at the drop in the temperatures that have occurred since the start of the summer, the sea surface temperature anomalies. Notice it's warming in here. Now what that does is that discourages convection and upward motion in this area. It encourages it further east in this area. And this is going to be very important for the winter. If this kind of pattern holds, where you have the strong upward motion here and sinking in here, I'm going to show you what that does at the end of it. See, I'm trying to link all this together. I hope everybody's getting this. So we see that we're moving from one thing to another. Now we're saying, okay, we're going to have an active September in the tropics, right? If you look really close, you can see here's stronger than normal winds, weaker than normal winds, but there's all weaker than normal winds now showing up here off Africa. So instead of having these strong winds blast dust off Africa and the easterlies being very strong and increasing shear, it's going the other way. Low-level winds are decreasing. What does that mean? Well, if the winds are supposed to be blowing with a certain ferocity, I don't know if I want to use that term. If the trades are weaker than normal, air starts going up. So here's Florence developing. Why does this say, well, we're negative on the western side? Is because we're looking at the component of the wind. Usually, let's say it's blowing out of the east at 15, 20 knots. It means it's negative. In other words, there's no wind there. And if there's stronger than normal winds here, weaker than normal winds here, the air has to go up. So you're seeing all this linked together. The cooling of the North Atlantic doing this, okay, leading to the weakening easterlies because of the negative NAO and lower pressures that develop there. Higher pressures develop to the south of that, near 40 degrees north, that starts the wave train going to the west. So here's our forecast. This first feature in here, I think, is going to try to become a storm and reach. And we've been on this thing for. It was nothing when it came off Africa. We say, look out, because the pattern would improve coming into the Gulf. So we have a tropical storm coming into the Louisiana coast the middle of next week. And this gets tricky because if it stays offshore, it's a real problem further west. Florence is going to try to recurve. If it misses the connection with the trough, it'll turn back to the west and could be a threat to the United States after the 12th. Subsequent waves come off after that. And look at how warm this water is in the North Atlantic here, south of the main cold zone. So this also encourages the buildup of an upper ridge of high pressure. So we've gone from the Simon and Garfunkel pattern of sounds of silence to what is a ridge over troubled water. You build it, they will come. We showed this last week that you put a big positive over the Northeast, you always have to look out underneath. So there's day 5, and we get out to the 6 to 10 day means. That's a day 1 through 5 means. There's that west-east ridge. Notice how this is over the colder water trying to go south. The ridge trying to come back into Greenland, right? But if there's anything that's caught underneath, it's coming west underneath that. So we have to really look out. Now, what are the implications for the winter? Well, suppose you have this cold water in the eastern Indian Ocean into the southwest Pacific, warmer water here. It leads, this is phase 8 of the Madden-Julian Oscillation. Phase 1 of the Madden-Julian Oscillation suppresses precip here. Precip is increased toward the equator and to the east of the date line in here and near the date line. And then this is phase 2, okay? And look what phases 8, 1, and 2 give you during the winter. Very, very cold temperatures. So what we're seeing now is actually backing up our winter forecast already. And so one thing is leading into the other. The typhoons are nature's way of taking heat out of the tropics. They've been blasting away in the western Pacific. Another one's coming. So the water has cooled there considerably. That starts changing the upward motion pattern. We see the water warming in the central Pacific. It warms in the Atlantic because of the negative NAO, partly due to all that cold water that's coming down. They're much colder than normal water, while the water is warmer off the eastern seaboard of the United States, creates the gradient that leads to the storms that weaken that strong easterly gradient in the Atlantic. Air starts going up, bang, the hurricane season comes to life right at the heart of the season. And when I say come to life, I'm not talking about a regular September. I think the ACE index for September is going to be 150% of normal, which is a lot. And I think while storms won't, we may have one storm that's going to intensify about 10 to 15 days in the Atlantic and try to come all the way across. Florence will remain relatively weak, and the weaker she remains, the more the chance they can turn back to the west at the United States and intensify in the latter part of her career. Remember, our preseason forecast had storms further north relative to averages being stronger than what they were further south. And of course, then we have the Gulf system. So I hope I'm making myself clear. This is all, it's a ding, 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 ding. It's all interrelated over here. Anyway, that's it for now. Enjoy the weather. It's the only weather you got.